Hello, Evan Day here again with another Fandom Friday, and this week we're going to talk about Star Wars. Ever since Star Wars came out in the 70s, there have been tons and tons of tie-in media. Along with the movies and TV shows, there's been comics, books, all sorts of stuff, and frankly, it can be overwhelming. I am not a Star Wars expert. I know just a little bit here and there. So I'm not going to tell you what the best Star Wars books and comics out there are or give you the full definitive guide, but I wanted to point out a few things that I thought were interesting. First off, you need to be aware that the funny thing about Star Wars books, whether they be comics or books geared toward teenagers or children or nonfiction, is that they're sort of influenced by when they came out. The Han Solo Adventures by Brian Daley are a favorite for a lot of classic Star Wars fans, but these books were actually written before Empire Strikes Back, so the first Star Wars sequel back in the 1980s. As a result, Han Solo and Chewbacca go off and have grand adventures in the Millennium Falcon, but they're not even fighting the Empire. They're fighting a sort of evil corporation because it wasn't known if the Empire was going to be back for the sequel. You know, the Death Star blew up. Who knew what the situation was? And there's a lot of that. You can't really expect a book that was written before this movie came out to totally line up with that sort of canon. And that's sort of the challenge with a lot of Star Wars books. After Disney bought the rights to Star Wars before they made the sequels, books that were made before the Disney purchase were sort of lumped in as legends. So if you see a book that has the Legends label on it, that's sort of the catch-all for, well, this book may or may not actually line up with the new movies that came out. They're not considered canon, so to speak. That doesn't mean the books aren't any good. A lot of these books, which are also sometimes called the expanded universe from all the books that came out during the 90s especially, are considered by many to be some of the best books in the series, and some might even like them better than the new canon with the Star Wars sequels from Disney. Basically, you have to make up your own mind, and I just want to emphasize that just because a book may not line up totally with the new movies or even the earlier ones, doesn't mean it's not a great story involving cool characters. After all, these are all imaginary stories anyway, right? Well, hopefully that doesn't get too many people mad at me. Anyway, here's a couple of ideas for books that you might find interesting if you're just diving in. There are a number of Darth Vader comics and stories, but this comic book came out in 2015. It is written by Kieran Gillian and drawn by Salvador Larroca. It follows Darth Vader after the events of A New Hope and the destruction of the Death Star as he investigates what went wrong and tries to get himself back in the good graces of the Emperor after that failure. It's interesting. It introduces a number of new characters like Doc Aphra, a sort of roguish character who gets her own comic book series later, and follows Darth Vader as he uncovers the true identity of Luke Skywalker for himself. This is in line with the Disney canon, for the record, and I found it very interesting. Vader ends up taking down a lot of people who, well, if they're not more evil than himself, they are certainly people you don't feel bad about him defeating in most cases. And it's some interesting challenges. I enjoyed it, but you might want to try it out yourself. One of the most interesting things you can do when reading a story, whether it be history or fiction, is to ask, what if? What if this thing happened? What if this person was removed from the story? How would that change things? Star Wars Infinities are a series of comics that ask that very question with regards to the original trilogy of movies. In A New Hope, Luke fails to destroy the Death Star. Could the rebels have come back? What would the Empire have done from that point forward? Could there still be a happy ending? In The Empire Strikes Back, Han doesn't reach Luke in time on Hoth, and Luke Skywalker dies. Is there someone who can still be trained to be a Jedi? Well, if you know the movies, you might have a little bit of a guess as to what happens there, but I won't spoil anything more. Then in Return of the Jedi, The initial Act 1 plot to rescue Han Solo from Jabba the Hutt goes terribly wrong, and that changes things throughout the rest of the movie. Anyway, it's just fun to see, like, if you pull one thread, how different things can sort of like cascade and change the events of the rest of the movie. Some very interesting stories there, and so I think they're worth checking out. A special shout out to Heir to the Empire by Timothy Zahn. This is the first book in a series of novels by Zahn, taking place immediately after Return of the Jedi. These are firmly in the Legends or Expanded Universe continuity and not necessarily in line with the Star Wars Disney sequels, but they're still very good and extremely popular. In fact, it sees the creation of several new characters like Grand Admiral Thrawn, a new villain for after the Emperor and Darth Vader are destroyed at the end of Return of the Jedi, and Mara Jade, who is a interesting character who will have a very unique connection to Luke in future Legends books. Again, some very interesting and popular characters among Star Wars fans get their start here. And in general, it's a very interesting take and idea for what could have happened to the rebellion after Return of the Jedi. Anyway, that's Heir to the Empire by Timothy Zahn, who's also written several other books dealing with Star Wars and science fiction in general as well. Well, that's this week's Fandom Friday. Leave a couple of comments about your favorite Star Wars media or what you were reading this weekend in general. Have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll see you next week.